A couple of videos ago, I introduced an HR agent built with Logic Apps, designed to answer questions appropriately about employment at Tabby, a cat matching app based on whether the employee asking the question is an intern or full-time. If you're new here, definitely check out my previous video, which I've linked above, that walks you through how to create your own Logic app. Today we're going to create the HR agent, so I'm gonna click on Add, and I'm going to type in HR agent. I'm going to type in HR agent 2 just so that it's different from the other HR agent workflow. And we're going to create a conversational agent. So this is pretty new and different from the traditional workflows, which were mostly, stateful or stateless, and autonomous, we've already discussed in previous videos, is of type stateful, but it just has an agent. Conversational is very different, and you can see why in just a second. This one does support the A2A protocol, and it's like you're conversing directly with the agent. So we're going to press create, and you're going to see in just a second that there is no trigger option. Instead, you get this when a new chat session starts. And once we were to save the workflow, an agent URL would be generated, and this is how you can communicate with the agent. You can also enter a name and description, but we're not going to do that today. Now, before we create our workflow, there's a few prerequisites for this one. First of all, we're going to do RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation, for this workflow based on HR documents. This is a process where our AI framework retrieves relevant knowledge to our questions before giving an appropriate response. I'm going to cover the prerequisites needed for RAG in another video. Once I create the video, I will link it above. But essentially the way it works is we're going to be uploading all the HR documents to storage, and each of these HR documents I have structured it as a JSON. That's because we can have a lot of different information encoded, not just the information in the doc, but things like the title of the document or the URL of the document, as well as the employment type. So these things are all encoded in our JSON file. All the sample HR documents are in my GitHub repo, which I've linked below in the description, so feel free to use them. Then via our Azure AI search instance, we are going to index and vectorize the data. To do this, you will need to create a new embedding model. In Foundry, GPT-4o is not going to work for this. By the way, we're going to do this without the employment type, because the employment type, once it's all indexed, we're going to add it in later and mark it as a filterable column. We'll need to make sure to add the employment type to our skill set, and then we need to make sure to reset and run our index to reindex it. I'm going to go to this agent, and I'm going to just choose one of my connections. I've talked about this in previous videos on how to create a deployment, how to add a connection. So I'll link those above. But we're going to add our deployment model name, and so that's GPT-4o. And I'm going to paste in my system instructions. So this one is just simple, you're an HR agent for Tabby, a matchmaking app designed for by cats for cats. And make sure that you know that you need to understand company policy and answer questions about employment Tabby, and that you need to provide the correct response based on whether the employee is an intern or a full-time. Then I also describe the tool that they have access to. So we haven't created any tools yet, but we will be in just a second. The tool that it has access to, and again, I've named it so that it's very easy for the agent to determine which tool to invoke. In our case, there's only going to be one tool, but so that it knows to invoke it properly, I have named the tool Obtain Relevant HR Documents. And this basically, I describe the tool, basically gives access to Tabby's internal HR knowledge base, and also gives some additional information that, hey, if you don't have that specific information, tell them to just contact the HR department, and sort of some other pointers of like how I want the agent to answer the question. I will also ask it to cite the sources, and this is why we had created those original documents, the HR documents as JSON, is so that we can include the title of document and link, and that way automatically these HR documents are linked and they can read more in detail. We're going to rename this agent HR agent, and then we're going to add a tool. So the reason that we have tools in agent workflows, right, is because normally just having a prompt isn't enough. If you want to have, answers that are factual, or you want some specific calculations to be done, anything like that, you will need to have a tool so that the agent kind of its superpowers, and it can accurately obtain the result. And so we're going to add the tool here. And the tool we're going to add is basically Azure AI search tool. And notice that adding a tool in Logic Apps is no different from adding an action, which if you've worked with Logic Apps before, you're already familiar with how to do that. So we're going to search vectors with natural language. And I'm going to name our tool Obtain Relevant HR Documents. Remember, that is what I said I would name it in the prompt. And then we'll add a description. So having a nice tool name and description is really great for the agent, because then it really, really knows what it needs to invoke the tool for. So that's done. We also need to add in some parameters that basically the agent will be passing on to our Azure AI search. So the first parameter is going to be a query, and that's just the user question, right? We want to make sure that that is being inputted into our Azure AI search action. We don't need to add a description. I think query is pretty self-explanatory. The other parameter we're going to add is type of employment. And this is a string parameter, and this one, it's nice to have a little bit of description, just so the agent is familiar what are the different types of employment. And in our case, it's just full-time or intern. So that's pretty much it. We have defined our tool name, description, and also the parameters. Now we need to actually define our action, right? And so for the index name, okay, so let me change the connection, because again, I was running into subscription limits. I think I've told you this, guys, before in another video, and I ended up deleting everything. And so that's why it's kind of going a little crazy here. But that's fine. So we have our connection name and then our authentication type. I think key-based authentication will work perfectly for now. And then what I'm going to do is add in our endpoint URL and admin key. And so for that, I'm just going to open up our AI search instance, and our endpoint URL we can just copy from here. And then our admin key, we can go to keys and we'll just copy from here. And I'm going to create a new connection. Okay, so now that connection works. So now we're going to click on an index name. HR index was the index that we created. And then the search text is, we're searching for the query essentially. And so that is an agent parameter. So you can use this agent icon to input our agent parameter. And so I'm going to type in query. Number of nearest neighbors, that's how many documents you want returned. Honestly, we could do anything for this, but let's do 3. And then we will need to fill in stuff for our advanced parameter. So I'm just going to press show all so we can see the entire view. And then I'm going to type in a filter condition. And our filter condition is going to look something like this. We want to filter on the type of the employment, right? So our filter condition will be this special sort of thing where employment type, EQ, and then the type of employment, which is the agent parameter. So that's something we need to make sure. And remember, employment type, that was defined in our index. We added that filter later on, and the type of employment is what the agent is kind of telling this tool in particular that this is the type of employment. So we need to make sure we have this filter condition. And I'll also put in the description below, if you're kind of curious of how to structure these filter conditions, sort of the logic for that. Okay, for vector field to search, that's going to be our vector. And if you want to just quickly check, I'll just show you the fields, right? The text vector is the thing that basically we vectorized. that is essentially, whatever content that we had, and but just in vectorized format. So we just need to make sure we have that there. And then in terms of fields to select, we're gonna have a few fields that we want returned. So I'm gonna add a few items here. And this is basically the fields that will be returned from the tool. And so we want the title of the document. We also want the URL of the document. And lastly, we want the chunk, and that's the actual content. It is going to be labeled as chunk. So we can see chunk here, and then the title URL. Okay, employment type was this filterable over here. So those are our important sort of columns that we are worried about. So we have filled everything in nicely. But I'm going to press save because that's pretty much all I need to do for now. So this next part of how to run the workflow is a little bit different from traditional Logic App workflows. Instead of pressing run or run with payload, we have this chat icon on top. So we're going to press that. Now over here, you can see that you have the option to configure Easy Auth to enable chat client. And the way that this works is once you configure Easy Auth, and I'm going to put those directions in the description, I'm not going to do it today, is that basically this entire chat client, it gets on a different website. And so that link you can send to anyone, and anyone can interact with your agent as long as they have access to this. But yeah, that will all be in the directions for Easy Auth. So we won't worry about that right now. Right now, since it's only for development purposes, it's totally fine if it's right here. No, I can't share this agent with anyone, but it's right now for me to just test it. And so I can ask a question. So what are the perks, for example? And I have not specified whether I'm an intern or full-time employee. So if our agent is working properly, which it seems to be, it is asking if I'm a full-time employee or an intern. So I'm going to say I'm a full-time employee. And Logic Apps has done the heavy lifting for you, right? It has full context and history. So it knows that you're a full-time employee who's asking about the perks for Tabby. I hadn't had to do anything other than, of course, set up the workflow. So let's see now what the answer is. So it gives us some compensation and bonuses topics, and health and wellness benefits, meals and subsidies, work-life balance. And you can see that this also is linked to the actual document. And as you can see, it's linked right to our GitHub repo, which is where I had set the linking to. And so, yeah, this is pretty comprehensive. Now, we can just kind of do the same thing, but for interns. So what are the perks for interns? And this time I'm just going to add that I'm an intern in the question, just so that we get an answer faster here. And you can see that this is fairly different list of what our perks are. They are catered to interns, and you can see that it's going to the intern health benefits HR document, right? So yeah, that's pretty much how it works. One last thing I want to show you is in case you kind of start working on this and it gives you some sort of like, hey, I don't have that information, and you think that that information should be there in your sort of database that you have created, then what you can do is go back here to the designer and then go to run history. And so this happened to me the first time I recorded it, when I was not getting a good response at all. It was saying, oh, we don't have this information. I'm like, you most definitely do have access to this information. And so you can look at the run history and see sometimes the tools will completely error out, and you can see that. And so that way you know when you're running into issues. In my case, earlier on when I had tried this, it didn't error out. And so I had to kind of think like, hey, what's up? And I realized I hadn't re-indexed. So it wasn't really recognizing the employment type in Azure AI search. But yeah, that's pretty much it.